What's going on with Friday the 13th? How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champane, and if you like monsters, slashers, pretty much any movie shot during, set during, or inspired by the 1980s, this is the channel for you. So in my last two videos about A Nightmare on Elm Street, I noticed in the comments that people were asking about what's going on with Friday the 13th and Halloween. I was going to start out talking about Halloween because you all know how much I love that franchise, but Friday the 13th actually has quite a bit of stuff going on. So this video is going to be broken up into three sections. The first one's going to be all about the TV series. The second section is going to be about a potential new movie, and then finally we're going to talk about the current situation with the game that you can go buy right now, but there's also some leaks about a new Friday the 13th game that I can kind of get into. But yeah, before I jump into it, if you want to keep up with the latest horror news, follow me over on Twitter at Jimmy Champane, and I'm also on Instagram. I post some horror stuff there as well. All right, with all that YouTube stuff out of the way, let's talk about the TV series in the Friday the 13th universe, which is being called Crystal Lake. This is kind of like a best of all worlds situation because this is a show coming from Bryan Fuller, who's the guy behind one of the most like criminally underwatched shows of all time, but not even in the horror world. I was going to say especially in the horror world, but not even in just the horror world, just straight up one of the most criminally underwatched shows ever, Hannibal. So he's teaming up with A24 to make this series, which obviously if you're a horror fan, you know who A24 is. They put out some of the best stuff over the past few years, like Hereditary, Midsommar, X, Talk to Me. There's so many movies that they put out, and they're going to Universal and basically getting distribution on Peacock for this TV show. So that's what I meant by a best of all worlds situation, because there's enough money to get the show made, but there's a great production company overseeing things as well, and the guy show running the show is one of the best TV creators in the horror world ever. As for when it's coming out, there's no release date or anything like that yet, but Adrienne King, who was the original final girl in the first Friday the 13th, actually let it slip in an Instagram post where she was talking about how the show is pitched to her by Bryan Fuller. She ended that Instagram post with coming 2024. So if the writer's strike and all that going on right now in Hollywood didn't screw anything up, I would guess that we'll probably see this show either by like mid next year or leading up to Halloween. Now, I know I love to complain, and I mean like everyone loves to complain about this if you like horror movies. A lot of movies that should be coming out around Halloween get released in the summer, but a TV show called Crystal Lake that's set at Camp Crystal Lake and it's in the Friday the 13th universe, that's something that I really want to come out in the months of May or June. You know, at the beginning of the summer when everything is still cool and you're not like looking forward to fall, that's the perfect time for something like this. And if you're still skeptical about this happening because you're remembering that CW show that I guess was going to be either like found footage or something, I don't really remember the details of that, and you're like, well, that had a full pilot made and that show never came out. This is not a situation like that, because not only did Universal order a full series, they've actually acknowledged the show's existence by saying Friday the 13th is one of the most iconic horror franchises in movie history, and we are dying to revisit this story with our upcoming drama series Crystal Lake. We can't wait to get to work with Bryan Fuller, a gifted visionary creator who we've had the pleasure of being a longtime friend and collaborator, along with our incredible partners at A24 in this updated version for Peacock that will thrill long-standing fans of the franchise. So whenever people involved with the show get asked where it takes place in the Friday the 13th mythos, like is it a remake, is it a prequel, is it a requel, what's going on here, basically the answer that's given is that it's like a pre-requel, where it retells the original story of the first movie, but also kind of pulls in some stuff from some sequels and also is a prequel in its own right. So to me, I feel like the easiest answer there is that it's just something new in the Friday the 13th universe, creating a whole new world with this franchise, but it's hard to win people over, I guess, these days without getting things right. So I understand why they're kind of throwing the kitchen sink at the terminology. Now, I've done a couple videos on this series before, and the last time I talked about it, I think was when the Variety article came out that said that Jason Voorhees couldn't be used in this show, and that was because of the fallout of the lawsuit where Victor Miller got, you know, everything that was in the first Friday the 13th movie, and Horror Inc. got everything in all the sequels. So basically, if they want to make something that's actually what fans want, they have to come together. But after that article came out, we got a tweet from Larry Zerner, who's like a very trustworthy lawyer, who's actually an actor in the Friday the 13th franchise, which is weird. And he explained that what Variety got wrong in their reporting is that this show is being executive produced by Victor Miller and Rob Barsamian. Now, you know who Victor Miller is if you've watched this channel channel at all or covered the lawsuits, or you're familiar with the writer of the original Friday the 13th movie. But Rob Barsamian is a name I personally hadn't heard before, and it turns out that he's like the top guy at Horror Inc. Sean Cunningham is just like the face of it, I guess, that everyone was kind of attributing to this lawsuit, but he's executive producing the show, which means he's teaming up with Victor Miller, which means they can use Jason Voorhees, Camp Crystal Lake, and everything else that was divided up in this lawsuit's fallout. And if you're sitting there thinking, shouldn't these guys hate each other? Like, what's going on here? Yeah, personally, in their real lives, they might hate each other. Like, I don't know. I'd probably be a little bit mad in this scenario, but like, you know, the way things shook out with the lawsuit, things got split 50-50. So if they want to make the most money, which was the whole point of the lawsuit in the first place, one person didn't feel like they're making enough money, they kind of got to work together to make this show. So I'm glad that's happening. So knowing that, I feel like the best route this show can take is to be a combination of the first 3 Friday the 13th movies. So like the first season of the show can cover what happened before the first Friday the 13th and kind of move into that, but then kind of combine the second and third movie for season 2, where we get Jason, but instead of him being like a sackhead overall wearing type dude, he's the zombie-ish Jason who wears a hockey mask in part 3, and then you can kind of move into that story as well. And honestly, like, anything's on the table after that. There's so many great stories they can pull from in the Friday the 13th franchise, because we all know Jason doesn't die. The longer the show keeps going, the more opportunities they'll have to retcon and fix things that maybe didn't work out in the other movies. So overall, I think it's a net positive here, knowing that they can use Jason and anything they really want to from the rest of the franchise. So yeah, in summation here, the show is coming in 2024. It's called Crystal Lake. It's going to be on Peacock, but it's being produced by Bryan Fuller and A24, and Victor Miller and Horror Inc. are combining forces to make sure that everything from the franchise can be used. So I feel like this show is primed to do pretty damn well. All right, so the show is out of the way. Next up, let's talk about what I think everyone wants to see from Friday the 13th, which is a brand new movie. And for the first time in a long time, things are actually looking pretty good. There have been rumblings about a new Friday the 13th for a long time now, even while the lawsuit was going on. I think there was a rumor a couple of years ago where LeBron James was actually going to produce it, and thankfully that just never came to fruition, and it doesn't look like he's involved in whatever's going to happen next. The latest update we got is from Bloody Disgusting, and that dropped earlier this year, and as far as sources go, I feel like you can't really get much better than that. So the article is actually an interview and announcement of 3 movies from Horror Inc. One of them is a remake of House, one of them is a new movie called The Night Driver, and the third one is what we're here to talk about today, which is Friday the 13th. So this Friday the 13th reboot is coming from a screenwriter named Jeff Locker. That's like a really hard sentence to say. I had like 20 takes there. And he's teaming up with a director named Jeremy Weiss, who is hired to direct The Night Driver, but you know, they're teaming up on Friday the 13th because they pitched Sean Cunningham on a new movie, and he liked the pitch enough to say, go ahead and develop. Now, back in January, Locker said, we're hoping the surrounding excitement will inspire both sides to come together and give us Jason on the big screen again for the first time in 14 years. But we also have a plan B for a sequel to the original we think fans will absolutely love and should avoid any legal entanglements. So with that info back in January, it didn't really sound like a sure thing, but since then we have that new update from Larry Zerner I talked about, where these parties are working together on Crystal Lake. So what's to say they couldn't just work together on a brand new movie? I mean, everyone involved with the rights of Friday the 13th probably wants that to be the case, and they probably also know that while yes, there is a lot of money to be made in TV right now, the real moneymaker is a brand new movie. And because it's horror, they'll probably follow the same formula everyone else does, which is to spend like 10 or $15 million on the movie, and hopefully if it's good, they'll make $100 million plus on it, and everyone will be happy in the world. So I'd say odds are pretty good that they'll be able to get the two sides to work together. Now this is where things get a little weird, because there hasn't been an update at all since January of this year. Like, I couldn't even find anything on the less reputable sites, and I even asked my leaker friends on Twitter that I've been talking to lately, and not only had they never heard of this article, they also didn't have any new info to share. So hopefully this movie's script was written or had a treatment or at least something ready to go before the writer's strike started. I feel like that's not really a huge expectation because this article is from January, so that's like 6 or 7 months that they had to work on it. I talked about this in my Nightmare on Elm Street video though. Horror movies have low budgets lately, which means they have to film pretty quickly, because the longer you spend filming a movie, the more money you're going to spend. So even with the writer's strike, I would guess that we could see this movie by the end of next year or in the middle of 2025. But I guarantee you a new Friday the 13th movie is coming in the next couple of years. It just makes too much sense not to happen. As for who would play Jason, if they want to go the route of bringing someone back, I would say go with Derek Mears, just because he's 51, and I'm also biased because Friday the 13th 2009 was a movie I was able to sneak into, and I absolutely love it. I think it's super underrated. But my real hope hope is that they pick someone new and that they use the same person in the show and the movie, right? Like you set up the backstory in the show and then you have a movie come out where you have the same Jason, and you don't require that the show be watched to see the movie, obviously, because that's what's kind of ruined the MCU for me lately. But you know, you have that little bit of lore drop ready to go for people if they do check out the movie and enjoy it. So yeah, that's all the info I've got on a new Friday the 13th movie. Let's move on to the third section of this video, which is the Friday the 13th game. Now this section is like 50-50 good and bad. I'll start out with the bad though, and that's all related to the old Friday the 13th game from Gun Media. So Gun Media's license expires at the end of this year, so December 31st, 2023. The game cannot be sold after that point digitally or physically by them. I mean, you could probably go to Walmart or GameStop and pick up some used copies or some brand new copies, but they can't actually make new copies of the game to sell, and it will be delisted from Steam. They also made it clear that the game will stay online until at least December 31st, 2024, and from that point forward, they can't guarantee it'll stay online, but because of that, they made the game $5 to purchase and also made every piece of DLC $1 each. Then on July 6th, they took things further by releasing an update for the game that unlocked pretty much everything, including legendary perks, skills, and challenge skulls, and then they also boosted people up to level 150. So like everything in the game is unlocked. You can just play it and have fun. You don't have to worry about any form of progression. It's just a video game now, like we had back in the day with Halo 3. So yeah, taking all of that into account, you'll at least be able to play the game until the end of next year, but I wonder if they could set something up where it's just fully peer-to-peer. I think it is peer-to-peer right now, but if they could set it up in a way where you don't need the servers at all and you could just play the game as is, I think that'd be pretty cool. And from that point forward, even after December 31st, 2024, I would guess that the bot mode in the game would still work, and that's cool because they unlocked everything in the game for everyone. So you can do some cool Jason kills, get some footage captured, and just have some fun with friends doing couch co-op maybe or something like that. Regardless, it does suck to see one of the most controversial, fun, and genuinely cool games to ever come out die a slow death like this. It deserved better just because it was one of the first asymmetrical horror games to really get it right. I remember covering it and Dead by Daylight quite a bit when I was making videos for Bloody Disgusting, and I have put so many hours into it. But it's not all doom and gloom because Gun Media does have their Texas Chainsaw Massacre game coming out this Friday when I'm recording this video, and it's getting glowing reviews across the board. I'm excited to check that out as well. But with the bad news out of the way, let's talk about the good news, which is that there is another Friday the 13th game in development. Now that the lawsuit's over, they can go back to the drawing board and start over. This one's not coming from Gun Media. It seems like they have zero involvement whatsoever. It was actually revealed by Rely on Horror, who was talking to Harry Manfredini, who's a longtime composer on the series, and he let it slip that a new game's in development and that the graphics are going to look a lot more realistic than the ones in the old Friday the 13th game. Now, as for what this game's going to be, I think there's only two routes that they're potentially going to take. The first one is to make a new asymmetrical horror game. As for who could make it, knowing that Gun Media isn't really going to be involved, I feel like Saber Interactive would be a great pick because they're the people behind the Evil Dead game, they're the people behind the World War Z game, two awesome experiences. They're also working on Toxic Commando with John Carpenter. I was there when that game was announced at Summer Game Fest, and for some reason I was the only person who cheered for it. There were just no horror fans, I guess, or people with taste in the crowd. I am calling out every single person who was there because no one cheered, it was just me. But yeah, in all seriousness, I think they do a really good job on a game like that. And then the other option is a game like The Quarry, Until Dawn, the Dark Pictures games, where it's like a co-op or single player playable movie. I think that would be awesome, and Supermassive Games, I feel like, is just one of the best horror developers out there, and I honestly wish they would make a movie at this point because I've loved some of the stuff they made over the past few years. Like The Quarry was one of my games of the year last year, and they worked in some really huge horror actors like Lynn Shay, David Arquette, Lance Henriksen, like tons of different characters, and it was a really cool werewolf story. I think they could absolutely nail a Friday the 13th game, and a playable movie one would work for any horror franchise, so I would love to see that. Unlike the movie, which I feel like we'll see by 2025 at the latest, I feel like a game is a whole different beast. They take a lot longer to make, and if they want to reach a bar of quality that's been set over the past few years by other horror games, I think they're going to have to take their time and really make sure they get it right. But yeah, that's everything that's going on with Friday the 13th right now. I feel like this video is going to end up being pretty long, so if you watch to the end, I just want to give you a huge shout out and say thank you. And if you watch to the end and you're not subscribed already, like, what are you doing? You obviously like the video enough to watch to the end. Just help me out and subscribe to the channel already. But yeah, in all seriousness, that's all I've got for you today on Friday the 13th. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Definitely let me know if you want me to cover some non-horror movies down in the comments, and also tell me what movies you're looking forward to. Anyway guys, as always, my name is Jimmy Champane, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.